police start, can you?
They pled guilty to what they did.
Can you talk about in the actual factual statement? Both of your clients said that they didn't mean to harm anyone, that they called it a prank. Can you elaborate on that?
Other than was said in court, no.
I mean, in terms of their intention when they started the fire?
They said they didn't intend to harm anyone.
Mr. Marco, when did the plea discussions begin, and what do you think triggered it?
What I think triggered
when did they begin, first of all?
Maybe yesterday, maybe the day before. I'm not quite sure when when you say when they began. With us, it was yesterday.
Okay.
All right, and it was the state's approach to us.
What did they say? Could you tell us what they said?
Let's talk. I mean.
Is this the first time that you've been approached with a deal by the prosecution?
Yes.
In all of these years?
Yes.
And do you think the state approached you because they didn't think they could get a conviction?
Why do you think they approached us?
I'm asking you.
I don't think anybody likes me. I think they approached us because it was they knew they had a weak case. And they knew the intervening cause of Seton Hall was really a problem. They couldn't do anything with it.
Mr. Bubb, do you concur with what Mr. Marco was talking about, with what your experts found out? And can you also elaborate on maybe a key point that your fire experts found that was a problem at Seton Hall?
Well, I think that I certainly concur with the comments and the reports by these experts, which outline this material, are all part of the public record, and some of you in the press have had them and chosen not to deal with them. So they're there. They're very explicit, and these are nationally renowned experts. I think the emphasis in those reports is that Seton Hall was aware of a very bad situation in this dorm, and they chose to deflect against false alarms rather than fires, so that the reporting system that they had in place in the dorm required the dorm security to verify the existence of a fire before the fire department was called. So when this fire started, it was 10 or 15 minutes after the fire started before the fire department was notified. At that point, the fire was well involved, so that there was no fire suppression. They had no sprinkler system, which they've since put in. They had a standpipe firefighting system on the floor, which the fire department used the water to put out the fire. They had hoses there up until a week before this fire, and they took the hoses down. And there's a very dramatic picture of a pile of these hoses in the first floor lounge that they took down with no explanation, so that their own dorm residents and their dorm officials, the senior members of their dorm staff, were undertrained, and they had no idea how to respond. So this was, my client stepped forward today and took responsibility for what he did, and that's part of the record. The fact that we are pleading guilty in the way that we did today, and not to these homicides, and not to these burn injuries, and not to this more serious, much more serious situation, is that the state didn't have the proof, and they never had the proof. And those of you that have followed this case are aware that there was a significant attack on the indictment, and they were not able to prove any of this stuff, particularly after these families, at great expense, went to these experts who analyzed these fires, and this is work that they should have done. And some of you may have been here for the hearing with their experts, who just didn't follow procedure, didn't know what the heck.
Do your clients have any remorse? Do you have any remorse for this?
Well, do I have any remorse?
Do the clients have any remorse?
What's your question?
Does that mean no?
No, it means I didn't answer you.
Well,
do you have a difficulty?
Sir,
when yes or no, I'm not answering you.
Do they have any remorse? I mean, it's a simple
I'm not
question.
answering that because there's a sentencing coming up. At the time of sentencing is the appropriate time for those remarks to be made. Not now.
Sir, any
remorse
lessons learned?
remorse
This started out as what was explained in court as what appears to be, at least on behalf of your clients.
What did you say?
Go ahead.
Oh, what did you say?
I said, you're going to say they're going to have remorse on January 26th?
No, I'm saying
that
this is not the time to discuss that. They still have to face a proceeding, which is sentencing. So at this point, I wouldn't like him to say a thing.
Is it possible we could just hear your clients on the thought of all of this happening today, after
Well, it's not ended today.
Well,
there's a sentencing that's coming up.
Coming to a resolution in this case.
Listen, on behalf of Mr. Ryan, I don't think it's appropriate for him to comment today. He's a young man who's been through an extraordinary ordeal and an extraordinary time for the last 48 hours, and I just don't think it's appropriate for him to talk to him. I mean, this is hard enough for a seasoned public official like myself.
The reason why
this is extraordinary.
The reason why we.
Well, you want to say that? You go ahead and say that.
What?
I mean, well, you all have said earlier that this plea deal was struck for the family. I mean, and if that's the case,
well, the families, it was struck for all families. I mean, it's my client's family.
There's a lot of families. That's a whole.
Well, the bottom line, though.
So at the time of sentencing is the appropriate time to do that.
Well,
not now, because there's another proceeding.
Remorse that day that they don't.
No. You know, you keep putting words in my mouth. Don't do that. All I said is today is not the appropriate day to do that, because the proceedings are still open. There will be a sentencing, and I will advise my client, as I did all throughout this case, there's no comment by my client until the matter is concluded, and it won't be concluded until sentencing day. I don't know what's hard to understand about that. I'm not saying there's no remorse. I'm not saying there's be remorse later but not now. That's not the issue. The issue is the proceeding is open. And like I tell Joe and I tell all my clients, don't respond to anything. No comment until it's over.
Do you think the
It would be extraordinary to think that my client didn't feel terrible about this.
Would you mind just sliding a little bit to
it? Would be extraordinary to think and suggest that my client doesn't feel terrible about this whole thing. There's no question about it.
I mean, that's
how to articulate it in a mature way in front of this caravan is the problem. So of course there's remorse. Everybody feels terrible about this. All the families feel terrible about this. Well, the nature of the injuries, and that's one of the reasons. Believe me, one of the reasons that these young men were put in a position to have to plead is because the enormity of the injuries. But look, the plea involves no confession, no admission to any involvement in the injuries. And that's specifically not part of the plea. No aggravated assault, no felony murder, no aggravated manslaughter. They didn't plead guilty to that. And you think if the Essex County prosecutor could have proven that they would have taken this plea? So they can't prove it. And they couldn't prove it for a lot of reasons.
Could you explain what you mean by the severity of the injuries? Was one of the reasons
well, obviously,
young men are pleading guilty? If they're not pleading guilty,
no, he talked about the remorse. Of course, everyone feels sorry about the injuries. Everyone feels badly about 3 young people dying. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, anyone can say that. But the question I was asked was about my client, and all we're saying is our clients aren't making any remarks until sentencing.
I was just wondering why, when Mr. Bubb referred to the severity of the injuries having something to do with the decision to plead in this case, and I was wondering if he explained what he meant by that.
Look, I think that the enormity of the matter is a factor to take into consideration. I think the enormity of the matter is a factor, and I think you folks are smart.
How so is it a factor?
I just think it's obvious. It's an obvious factor, and I think that my client stood up today and accepted the limited responsibility that he was involved in this case.
Well, if there is this remorse, what
difference would that have made?
Well, why wouldn't you admit to it from day one?
Admit to what? Felony murder?
Because we didn't do felony murder.
Admit to setting fire.
Because that
wasn't the indictment. The indictment was felony murder and homicide.
And 58 counts of aggravated assault. 58 counts of aggravated assault, and a month before we started jury selection, they dropped 50 counts. This was a very heavily overloaded indictment, and they voluntarily dismissed 50+ counts of aggravated assault, and proceeded with the 5 or 6 cases where people were seriously injured. And we conceded that we made a motion in which we said that the injuries were significant and that we would not contest the nature and extent of the injuries.
Sir, if the case was so weak, how much input did your clients have in crafting the statements they rendered?
It's their words.
It's their words. I mean, it was a situation where something had to be said regarding on the admission of guilt. I spoke to Joey, and Joey said this is what happened, and this was written down. I mean, it was not, you know.
Do what?
What did your clients think was going to happen after they started the fire? Did they think it would be
I don't know.
I don't know.
The state must have thought so. Because they dropped all those charges.
Did the prosecution overreach, and do you feel as though they did so under pressure from the media, from family?
I don't know what pressure they were under. That's you have to ask them that. Did they overreach? It's obvious, because this is the offer they made. For instance, if you know someone said, "Why did you wait all this time?" Because this was the time the plea was offered. You think that when after the indictment, they came to us and said, "Listen, plead to this," we would have turned it away? We would have spent all this money, spent all this time? Of course not.
We spent a month cross-examining their experts.
We had
a month, and it's after those witnesses did so poorly
that they came around.
So I mean
we
those
had
transcripts are available.
Overall, what would you put the price on this defense? With the experts, with the time, with the...
It's none of my business. I just, you know, whatever the family spent.
$10 million, $15 million?
Oh, for the defense?
Overall, with
From
the
your lips to
experts.
God's ears.
I'm not
From your lips to God's ears.
Sir, can you briefly just kind of sum up what did your clients, admit to doing with regard to this, and what have they not admitted to doing?
Well, what they have not admitted is committing